The neighborhood of Sycamore Grove was designed to be an architect's dream of suburban symmetry. Every lawn was a precise 4 inches tall, every curtain was a neutral shade of eggshell, and every driveway was free of oil stains. But to Special Agent Marcus Thorne, the silence of the street didn't feel like peace. It felt like a held breath. Marcus had moved into 412 Sycamore Lane under the cover of a consultant for a logistics firm. In reality, he was a deep-cover investigator for the FBI's Public Corruption and Civil Rights Division. For 18 months, the Bureau had been receiving anonymous, terrified tips from this zip code. Stories of elderly residents losing their life savings to special assessments, of midnight visits from men in tactical gear, and of a woman named Marilyn Cross who ruled the neighborhood with the cold efficiency of a cartel boss. Marilyn Cross lived in the largest house on the cul-de-sac, a limestone monstrosity that overlooked the entrance to the community like a watchtower. As the long-standing president of the Sycamore Grove HOA, she had slowly transformed a standard community board into a private fiefdom. Marcus spent his first 3 months doing what he called passive observation. He sat on his porch, sipping coffee, and watching the black SUVs patrol the streets. These weren't police vehicles, but they were outfitted with amber light bars and stenciled with HOA compliance unit. He watched as they stopped Mr. Henderson, a 75-year-old widower, for the crime of having a hairline crack in his sidewalk. "That's a class of structural hazard, Arthur," the man in the vest would say. Marcus, his hidden collar mic recording every word, listened as the enforcer demanded a $500 on-site mitigation fee to avoid a lien filing. No receipt was offered. No paperwork was signed. Just a handoff of cash in the shadow of a garage door. Marcus began his work in the dark. He didn't approach neighbors directly. He met them at grocery stores 2 towns over or at community centers where the HOA's reach didn't extend. He gathered a mountain of evidence, ledgers of cash payments, photos of the enforcers' faces, and recorded testimonies of intimidation. By the end of his first year, Marcus had traced nearly $355,000 in diverted funds. Marilyn wasn't just fixing sidewalks, she was laundering money through a series of shell landscaping companies owned by her enforcers, men with violent records who acted as her personal muscle. As Marcus's investigation deepened, the neighborhood began to change. Neighbors who had once been too terrified to speak started talking to one another. Marcus, acting as a concerned resident, began pointing out that the HOA bylaws Marilyn cited didn't actually exist in the county records. "You know, Bill," Marcus told a neighbor during a backyard barbecue, "I checked the state statutes. An HOA can't fine you for the brand of birdseed you use. That's outside their jurisdiction." Word spread. The cash flow to Marilyn's office began to dry up. Residents started demanding receipts. They started recording the compliance officers with their phones. Marilyn Cross was no fool. She noticed the shift in the neighborhood's vibe, and she traced the epicenter of the descent back to 412 Sycamore Lane. She confronted Marcus at the community pool one afternoon. She looked every bit the suburban socialite, oversized sunglasses, a designer wrap, and a smile that had the warmth of a surgical scalpel. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice a practiced purr. "You've been a very active member of our little family. But some people find your questions disruptive. We value harmony here." "I value the law, Marilyn," Marcus replied, looking her in the eye. "And the law says your compliance unit has the same legal authority as a pack of stray dogs." The smile vanished. People who don't fit into Sycamore Grove usually find that life becomes very difficult for them. "I'd hate to see you have an accident on these winding roads." The escalation was swift. When Marcus refused to move out after a series of fines for non-existent violations, Marilyn decided to move from fraud to violent intimidation. On a Tuesday evening, as Marcus was driving back from the regional FBI field office with a final set of warrants in his briefcase, he rounded the bend leading into the neighborhood. 2 black SUVs were parked horizontally across the road, completely blocking the entrance. 3 men in tactical vests stood in the gap. They weren't holding clipboards this time. They were holding Glocks. Marcus slowed his car to a crawl and stopped 20 feet from the barrier. He hit the record button on his dashcam and activated his emergency beacon to the tactical team trailing 10 miles behind him. The lead gunman, a man Marcus knew as Viper from his research, a dishonorably discharged ex-soldier, approached the driver's side window. He tapped the muzzle of his pistol against the glass. "Window down, Thorne," Viper growled. Marcus complied, his hands visible on the steering wheel. "This is an illegal roadblock on a public thoroughfare," Marcus said calmly. "You are committing a felony." "This is a private community, and you're no longer welcome," Viper said, leaning in. "You're going to turn this car around, keep driving, and never come back. If we see your face on this street again, you won't be walking away." "I live here," Marcus said. I have a legal right to passage. You have the right to a closed casket, the gunman replied, clicking the safety off. Marcus knew the psychology of a bully. They expected a civilian to crumble. They didn't expect a federal agent who had spent 4 years in the shadows of the most violent gangs in the country. When the gunman reached inside the car to grab Marcus's throat, Marcus moved. It was a blur of calculated violence. Marcus grabbed the gunman's wrist, twisting it upward to redirect the muzzle, and drove his car door open with explosive force. The door slammed into Viper, knocking him back. Marcus exited the vehicle, drawing his concealed service weapon in one fluid motion. FBI! Drop the weapon! Marcus bellowed. The second gunman, panicked by the sudden shift in power, fired a shot. The bullet shattered Marcus's side view mirror. Marcus returned fire, aiming for center mass. He dropped the second gunman with 2 rounds to the chest. Viper scrambled for his fallen pistol, and Marcus fired again, hitting him in the shoulder. The third man, seeing his partners hit the pavement and hearing the roar of high-performance engines approaching, dropped his gun and bolted into the woods. Neighbors, drawn by the gunfire, looked out their windows and stood on their porches, their phones capturing the scene as the consultant from 412 Sycamore Lane stood over the HOA cops with the cold authority of a man who owned the night. The local police arrived first, but they were quickly pushed back by a fleet of black Suburbans. 40 federal agents swarmed the neighborhood. The consultant Marcus Thorne was greeted with a tactical vest and a jacket that read FBI. Warrants were executed simultaneously at Marilyn's home and the HOA office. Inside Marilyn's limestone fortress, agents found the Black Ledger. It contained the names of every resident, their perceived weaknesses, debts, health issues, family secrets, and a column for cash collected. They found burner phones used to coordinate the compliance unit, and a safe containing $80,000 in untraceable bills. Marilyn Cross was arrested in her silk pajamas. She shrieked about her rights and her connections, as she was led in handcuffs past the very neighbors she had terrorized for years. Mr. Henderson stood on his porch and watched, a quiet, tearful smile on his face. The federal case against Marilyn Cross was a masterclass in dismantling a criminal enterprise. The charges were staggering: racketeering, RICO, federal extortion, conspiracy to commit armed assault, and impersonation of law enforcement. Marilyn Cross, convicted on all counts. The judge, noting her predatory behavior toward the elderly, sentenced her to 26 years in federal prison. She was ordered to pay $1.2 million in restitution and was permanently banned from ever serving on any board or in any fiduciary capacity. Viper and the second gunman, sentenced to 18 and 15 years respectively, for their roles in the armed assault and extortion ring. The Sycamore Grove HOA was dissolved by a court-appointed receiver. The assets, the limestone building, the SUVs and the mitigation funds, were sold to repay the victims with interest. 6 months later, Marcus Thorne sat on his porch. He was no longer undercover, but he had decided to keep the house. He liked the neighbors, and he liked the way the street looked when the people who lived there actually owned it. The black SUVs were gone. The compliance units had been replaced by a group of neighbors who met once a month for potluck dinners. There were no fines for oil stains or non-neutral curtains. As the sun set over Sycamore Grove, Mr. Henderson walked by, heading to the park. "Evening, Agent Thorne," the old man said with a nod. "Evening, Arthur," Marcus replied. The neighborhood was finally quiet. Not the quiet of a held breath, but the quiet of a community that had been set free. Marcus took a sip of his coffee, watched the kids playing in a driveway that was technically too cluttered by HOA standards, and smiled. The investigation was closed. The street was finally home.